Welcome to the Better Than I Found It podcast, episode 13. I'm Mike McGraw, men's golf coach at Baylor. And my guest this week is Oklahoma State Director of Athletics, Mike Holder. Mike is the busiest man that's been on this podcast so far. So I want to say a special thank you to him for his time today. I caught him in an off football week, but I'm still grateful as I know he has a lot going on up there in Stillwater. Mike and I go back probably right at 50 years, and we've covered a lot in this podcast today. However, there will be a part two. We didn't get to everything today. I hope you enjoy part one. Mike Holder, goodness gracious, welcome to the Better Than I Found It podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today on this Friday.
Yeah, I can't believe that you got so far down at the bottom of the barrel that you got around to me.
Well, I always knew I had you in my hip pocket thinking maybe if I just have nobody else, maybe I could use Mike Holder on the podcast. So it worked. Great.
Yep,
But
here I am.
Here we are today. Well, I actually have one listener that's been asking for your podcast for a long time. That's my assistant coach, Mikkel. He has heard so many stories through the years about you. He kind of just wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth. So a lot of the stories you're going to tell today is the first time he's heard them, and maybe not the first time some OSU people have heard them, but certainly a lot of the listeners on this podcast have never heard these stories today, and kind of just how you've sort of helped transform college golf over the last 45 years or so. And I know you're thinking, you don't want me to give you too much credit or whatever, but I'd still like to explore and examine some of these areas. But that would start with your childhood, Mike. You were born in, I think, Andrews, Texas. Is that right? Or some people say Odessa.
You're close. You're in the Permian Basin. I was born in Odessa, and my parents lived in a Gulf Oil Corporation camp in Goldsmith. Now, if you don't know where Goldsmith is, it's not too far from No Trees, and that's close to No Water.
Wow. Well,
And the only thing that mattered at that point in time in the Permian Basin back in the 40s and 50s were oil and football.
oh yeah.
Yeah, Friday Night Light, Odessa Permian. Uh, I went to elementary school in Odessa. Uh, my parents took that house they lived in that Gulf camp. They put it out up on blocks, moved it to Odessa. We lived in that until I was in the first grade, first grade. Then they built a house in Andrews, which is 30 miles north of Odessa, and I went through elementary school there, and then moved to Oklahoma. So
The nature of moving around was sort of your dad's job, being a wildcatter on an oil rig. Is that correct?
yeah, he was just a tool pusher, roustabout, roughneck, tough guy. Um, Worked at the top of those derricks, and they don't ever shut those down 24/7, rain, snow, sleet, hail. The first time he came to a college golf tournament after he retired, we were playing at Prairie Dunes, and weather was moving in, and they suspended play. And he said, "Why is everybody going to the clubhouse?" And I said, "Well, Dad, there's a storm moving in, and there's lightning in the area." And he said, "Yeah, so what?" They never shut down those oil rigs. He couldn't understand everybody running for cover. So, yeah, that was the old days.
That was the old days. And Speck he was a tough man. He was a great man. I mean, the players on the team, just the year and a half the year that my first year was the last year Speck was alive. So my first year at Oklahoma State, and I saw the reverence and the respect that guys like Edward Lohr and plenty of those guys and Bo Van Pelt had for your father. I mean, they just loved him. And you had made him a marshal out of the golf course.
Yeah, he just loved young people. Um, and I think the reason, maybe, when he got a little bit older, he just saw himself in those young people, their hopes and dreams and aspirations and all that. And he just gravitated toward that. So Uh, and he loved to talk to people. He was really a friendly sort of guy. And I didn't. I just heard from my mom uh, before they got married. He was pretty rough and tumble. His idea of a perfect week was to work all week on that oil rig. They paid pretty well back in those days, and then he'd try not to spend it all that weekend in the honky tonk and try to fight everybody in the honky tonk and stay out of jail. That was pretty much a pretty good week.
Well,
And
one of the things you did my first year at Oklahoma State was you saw a rattlesnake on the driving range, and you went over and pinned him behind the ears there, sort of, and picked him up. And you had this rattlesnake in your hand, and I thought, man, you're crazy. And Speck drove up in his cart, and it was like, no, that's my boy. I taught him to do that. It was like, man, I'm running from those rattlesnakes, and here you are just picking them up. No big deal. He taught you that, I bet.
yeah, he was about 80 years old, and when we were building our golf course, and we just sighted the fifth fairway, and it was kind of late in the evening, and a big timber rattler was slithering across the fairway, and he saw it, and I had my golf clubs out there with me, and he got the 2-iron out, and he pinned that snake's head down and reached down there and picked it up. Now the problem was my dad wasn't as strong at 80 as he used to be, and that was a big rattlesnake. The head was bigger than my fist, and that snake wrapped itself around his arm and started backing his head out of that grip. And now who's got who? Does my dad have the snake, or does the rattlesnake got him? And so he grabbed hold of the tail and started unwinding. And who could get, the question was, could he unwind the snake before the snake got out of the grip of his fist? And thank goodness dad got rid of that snake, and he didn't pick up any more big ones. He decided it was best to leave those in the rearview mirror.
Well, I just know this. He was a pretty tough man, and I did enjoy getting to know him the short time that I got to know him. But I will always remember how much respect those players had for him. So, but anyway, he's roustabout on the oil rigs. You guys are moving around. You end up at Ardmore High School in Ardmore, Oklahoma. Your, I guess, sophomore year. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually moved there, I think, when I was a freshman.
Okay. And you played some pretty good golf, had a pretty good head pro there that was an Oklahoma State alum. And he kind of helped you with your golf game for sure. But you told me a story one time, and I really want this told because you grew up a big Oklahoma football fan. I mean, Bud Wilkinson was winning 10 or 11 games a year, and they won 47 in a row. And a young kid growing up in Oklahoma was going to be a football fan in the 1950s, an OU football fan. And there was a chance meeting with Labor and Harris. Can you tell me about that?
Well, I was going to go to the University of Oklahoma because they had what was his name? Bruce Wilkerson.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the OU team, and he played at Ardmore, and he shot 62 at Dornick Hills, which is a really, really hard golf course back in those days, back in the 60s. I couldn't even imagine somebody shooting a score that low. So uh, Bruce played some golf with me and thought I was good enough to play at OU. And so I was going to go to school there. And the pro at Ardmore was Chris Gears. And he said, well, don't be so quick just to go to play it in Norman. They've got a golf team up in Stillwater at Oklahoma State University. Now, no one in Ardmore High School was going to go to Oklahoma State. They were either going to go to Central Oklahoma or Southeast, or they were going to go to OU if you were good enough, if you could afford to go to OU. And so I couldn't imagine anybody going to Oklahoma State. But Chris Gears took me got me set up for I guess, a unofficial visit, for what you'd call it, Stillwater. My dad drove me up there, played 9 holes with Labor and Harris, and in the pro shop they had these All-American plaques, and I didn't even know. That's how naive I was. I didn't know you could be a golf All-American. I thought that was just football players. And then I saw a national championship trophy. And when I had visited Norman, I'd played golf with the assistant basketball coach, who was also the head golf coach. Bud Cronin. And I didn't see any All-American plaques, and I didn't see any national championship trophies. And so that intrigued me. And then after we played that 9 holes with Laban Harris, he said, you haven't won a lot of tournaments, but I think you've got some potential. If you'd like to come to school here, I might be able to get you a Trans-Mississippi golf scholarship, not a golf scholarship, but a Trans-Mississippi scholarship, which I think was $500 at the time, if you're willing to major in turf grass. But I can't do anything for you athletic aid. And OU had offered me probably around a half scholarship. I can't remember. And so on the drive home, my dad said, son, I know you've got a decision to make here, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I just know this: if you want to go to Stillwater, don't worry about the money. Your mother and I have saved our whole life so you could have a chance to go to college. And we want you to go where you'd like to be. And that meant a lot to me back then, but it means even more to me today. And I see so many youngsters making decisions for all the wrong reasons and picking schools because of the amount of scholarship, which is the least valuable thing any athlete's going to get uh, when they go to college. It's going to be more about the coach that you're with every day, the teammates that you're around every day, the values, the culture, the work ethic, the principles, all those things are what matter. And if you pick the right place and get connected with the right mentors, and I say mentors because it's not only just the head coach or the assistant coach, it's everybody on that team, the whole culture. You get in the right environment, it's transformational, and you can't put a value on what that's worth. It's priceless. And so, golf's we're probably lucky that in golf you only get 4.5 scholarships. So virtually every youngster's coming on a partial ride. They've all got to invest in their own education. They've all got some skin in the game. And at the end of the day, I think golfers are better served because of that. And I think as I look around college athletics today, a lot of the problems are caused by the influx of money into the system and the problems that are associated with that. And a lot of the entitlement is because of the full scholarship sports, and you see a lot less of that in the equivalency sports. And so I was so blessed that my mom and dad let me make my own choice, and I did go to Stillwater. And after 2 years, I earned that scholarship. And because I earned it, it meant a whole lot more to me. And all the things that I learned at Oklahoma State University, playing for, in my opinion, I could say that Laban Harris was the greatest coach of any sport in the history of college athletics. Uh, Maybe there's someone as good as him, but there's no one better. And he gave me a lesson in life every single day if I was willing to show up at the golf course. And I promise you that he outworked every single player that ever showed up there. And he beat just about every one of them until Greer Jones showed up. He had a little trouble beating Greer Jones, but
Well,
everybody else did too. So that's what, unfortunately, there's not enough information out there for young people to make informed decisions about where they should go to school. And getting connected with the right people that share, that you have some commonality with, that should drive all these decisions. But too often, it's who offers the most money, who gives the biggest scholarship, that usually wins the day. And then you find out one day, 5 days, 1 year into it, that there's better places out there because you're competing against one of those other teams, and you see that there are probably better ways to do things than, unfortunately, a lot of the places or where you might be. So I don't know if I said anything. I went in a big circle, but
No,
I
that
think
was
you can
perfect, Mike.
tell that I'm passionate about uh, my former coach, Laban Harris. I think about him maybe every day, and even if I don't think about him, he's here with me.
Mike, in all the years I was there with you, 16 years at Oklahoma State, you got emotional about 3 times. One was the night your father passed away when we were at Albuquerque. And one of the other times was when you were handing the job over to me several years later, and you were talking to both men's and women's golf teams about Laban Harris and what he had meant to you. And so that's a nice segue into, let's just talk briefly about Laban Harris, why he was such a great coach. Um, One of the things that's not often mentioned is he taught the game of golf to anybody who wanted to learn, anybody. But he specifically was the golf coach at Oklahoma State. And so he was also teaching elite players. But he had a genius about him. Tell the story about every day when you'd go out and play labor in a golf match. He played you just about 3 or 4 times a week.
Well, uh, a lot of people talk a good game. Uh, there's a lot of coaches out there that like to toot their own horn. Uh, there's a lot of catchphrases you can use, uh, but when you get right down to it, it's youngsters don't listen to you; they watch you, and it's a whole lot more important what you do than what you say. And so, what Laban Harris did is he was a living, breathing example every day of how you should live your life. And he got up early in the morning. He taught typing and shorthand in the College of Business. And then he had built Lakeside Golf Course with volunteer labor. And so he would go out to Lakeside as soon as he finished his classes. And he was the head pro. He wasn't the green superintendent, but he supervised what the superintendent did. And and then he would get ready for the team to show up after you got out of your classes around noon or 1 o'clock. And by the time you got to the golf course, he was already at the practice tee getting ready. And then anybody that wanted to play, he was ready to take them on. So every single day, he'd be on the first tee. And if you wanted some competition, just show up. You could put up 25 cents. If you beat him, you got a new golf ball. If you tied him, you didn't get anything. And he kept the money no matter what. And I learned that he got the balls for free. So we all contributed to his retirement account, 25 cents at a time. And by his work ethic and the kind of player that he was and how competitive he was, you wanted to beat him so bad, but he was really, really hard to beat. And when I finally, he took me as just a neophyte player. And then after about 8 months or a year being around him, I'd gotten a whole lot better physically. And then it got into the mental challenge because if you were good enough to compete with him and get close to beating him, then it became psychological warfare. And he knew all the right buttons to push to get you out of your comfort zone, get you to think about all the wrong things and beat you again. And then the lesson you learned when you sat down and reflected on how in the world did he just whip me again when I had him right where I wanted him? And you began to learn that, hey, there's two parts to this game. One is the physical part. At the end of the day, that's just the beginning. The real challenge is the mental part, and it's what you're thinking about in the 4 hours that you're going to play a round of golf. And he was a master psychologist, so he was a great teacher by deed rather than word.
Well, what you just explained and described right there is one thing I'm going to hit on a little bit later about player development. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. So I know you learned a lot from him there. I learned a ton of it from you, just watching. And the example you had for me every day was pretty similar. You got up early, you worked out, we went and worked in the office, we had a quick lunch, and we were at the golf course before the guys were. So, you were carrying on his tradition quite nicely by the time I had gotten there in the late 90s. But a couple other things Laban did that I thought were genius. And I want you to describe them if you would. The cedar tree on the range at Lakeside. And then about just off of each tee box, there were shoots of trees. Can you describe how those things may have impacted you as a golfer?
Well, the cedar tees are critical because, weather gets pretty bad in Stillwater, and the wind blows out of the north when the cold front comes through. And even if it's a really, really cold day and windy, if you could get behind a cedar tree and get a windbreak, you could practice. And so what happened, there were probably 4 or 5 big cedar trees on that practice range out at Lakeside. And wasn't very far into the winter season where there wasn't any grass left around there. And I like to practice with 2 clubs on the ground, pointed to my target, and then I tried to make sure I didn't touch either one of those clubs with my club head when it came through the hitting area. And so I would just start at the front of the 2 clubs and then just work my way back, putting a ball on the back end of the divot each time. Well, before long, you had trenches, and by the end of the winter, you, it was just like a war zone around those cedar trees. But it taught me that you could get out and get some work done even on really, really cold days, and those cedar trees were uh, a stroke of genius by him. Um, and then the other thing is 2 or 3 of the tee boxes, it was a long shoot that you hit out of. It was probably maybe 20 yards wide, maybe less, 15 yards wide, and maybe, 80 yards long. And so you'd tee it up with your driver. And if you couldn't start the ball on a line, you'd immediately, if you were somebody that liked to hit a big hook or a big slice, you couldn't get out of the chute. You'd hit a tree and it'd drop down on the tee box. And every time we would play Oklahoma University in a match, invariably most of those guys hit a big draw. So Coach Harris would go out and he would put all the tee boxes, the tee markers on the far right side of every chute. And like I said, there were 4 or 5 of them. Well, he knew most of those kids couldn't get out of the chute. And then especially if you had a right to left wind, there's no way that our opponent was going to be able to function in that situation. But us, we were used to it every day, and you were able to. The genius, it forced you to be able to learn to start the ball on a line, and then you had to be able to curve the ball back into the wind to stay in the fairway. If you could only curve the ball one way, then there were going to be days you couldn't play Lakeside Golf Course. You were always going to be in the rough on one side or the other. So I think that contributed to every one of our players being really good drivers of the golf ball. And you mentioned it before we started this podcast, guys like Doug Toole, who led the PGA Tour in driving percentage for I don't know how many years.
Years.
And we had a lot of really, really good drivers of the golf ball that played for us. So yeah, when he laid out the golf course, he was pretty smart.
I think that's pretty genius. And one of the things that most people don't know is he did the front 9 for about $500 and built the back 9 for 1,000. That's value right there now.
Yeah, he splurged on the back 9. Among some of the really great qualities Coach Harris had, he was a real penny pincher, a legendary penny pincher, miser, and there's more stories than I can remember about his unwillingness to part with a dollar.
Well, my dad lived through the Depression. Your dad came through the Depression, and obviously Laban was a Depression person. He was working for a living during the Depression. I think that never leaves you. I think it's always there. So
Mike,
yeah.
When you went to work for me, you're an unusual guy.
Oh, Mike, are you turning this around on me right now?
Well, I've never ever known anybody like you. Now, I've seen someone like you in the movie.
Okay.
Dustin Hoffman.
Ooh, Rain Man.
Rain Man.
Yeah, Rain Man.
Yeah, that's you. And you remembered so many totally insignificant facts that it's mind-boggling.
Still is.
So that was one thing that made you unique. You knew every golfer that had ever won any major championship, the year they won it, the score they shot, all that. I mean, it's just mind-boggling the stuff that you knew, just facts. And then the other thing was I'd never met anybody that had as positive an attitude as you. You came to work every day with a smile on your face. There wasn't, no matter how bad a situation was, you could figure out something good about it. And after about a month of being around that, I took it upon myself to see if I could ever get you to take a positive or a negative spin or anything, ever get you upset about something.
Well, let me interrupt. What got you really on this target was I said, Mike, don't try to give me a hard time. I'm like Teflon. Everything you say to me just flows right off of me. No big deal. And you looked at me like, are you kidding me? Now
Yeah.
you can take the story the rest of the way.
Yeah. And you were right. Every single day, I tried to do something, say something to get you upset, and I couldn't do it.
Mm-mm.
And so I don't know how many years we'd been together.
3, I remember.
All right, 3 years. And back in those days, you couldn't have both coaches out giving advice at the same time. I mean, how archaic is that rule?
Crazy.
You got 2 coaches and you got to pick before the round starts who's going to get to give advice today. Crazy. Mikkel, he can't imagine that. I mean, but that's the way it was. There have been a lot of dumb things in college golf, but that was right there at the top of the list. So anyway, I decided I was going to let you coach the team down in Dallas. We were playing in that Red River Shootout, I think it was, Greg Rose tournament. It's not at Dallas Athletic Club. Is that Dallas Athletic?
Yeah, it was Dallas. Yes, that's where it was.
Yeah. And so you couldn't believe it. I believe that's the first time that I'd let you actually have hold of the steering wheel. You were going to drive the car, And
Couldn't wait.
And we had a pretty good team. And we played 36 holes the first day miserably. Miserably. And so you weren't feeling too good about that. But we started that second day and you were going to try to make a move. And so we started, I think, on the back 9. That's how bad we were playing. We didn't even get to start on the front 9 with all the other people. So we were probably in the bottom half of the field. And that's not normal for Oklahoma State golf team at that time.
Not when you had Edward Lohr and Charles Howell on the team. That's a pretty good start right there.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So I think it was probably the 12th hole, maybe. It was a par 3 on the back 9. And you were standing there on the tee, and we weren't playing much better those first 3 holes. So you were a little bit down in the dumps. You couldn't really tell it outwardly, but I sensed it. And so I went up there and I said, Mike, there's a really a silver lining in all this bad play. And so you perked up because you were looking for anything positive, right?
I was.
Positive guy. And you said, yeah. What is that? You're thinking I'm going to give you some kind of compliment. And I said, well, we're going to play again next week. And I'm going to be the coach. And you're going to really make me look good.
Oh, I was so mad at you. Oh.
And I immediately, it was like gasoline on a fire, and your face got flushed, and I could tell that, goodness gracious, for the first time he's upset about something. And I looked at you and I said, I got you. I got Teflon. I was just about to give up on it. I thought it was absolutely impossible to upset you. But now I know even Teflon.
You had cracked the code. And so that's the problem when you give somebody like you an opening. Now you go, okay, now I got it. And it was every day after that. So I had to be on my guard at that point because you were coming full guns loaded.
Yeah, it was like boot camp for the Marines every single day for you, where the sergeant gets up in front of everybody.
Well, it's funny.
Relates everyone.
I want to talk more about a little bit more about other things regarding that. But I remember the very first day I went to work for you in the summer of '97. Well, we'd work golf camp, and we're first day in the office, and you're getting ready to go recruit for the entire summer. I think Robbie just said goodbye, and I'll see you in August because you were going to recruit the whole summer. And archaic rule, only one coach could go on the road in those days. So, but I said, well, what do I do this summer? And you go, well, I don't know. I guess you mentioned that media guide. You could work on that. You mentioned a few other things. You said, but McGraw, I really don't know what to tell you to do. You're going to have to figure out some things to do. I know one thing, though. I'm the bad cop. You're the good cop. And I'm going to cut them off at the knees, and you're going to make them feel good about being short. That's your job. And this man's real. He's right. He's going to kill everybody, and I just got to make him feel good. That was pure genius on your part, Mike.
Yeah, and I also told you this, that there's going to be some good things around here,
Yeah.
and I'm going to get all the credit for the good.
Yeah.
There's going to be some bad, and you're going to get credit for all the bad.
Don't I remember that? Boy, it seems like I was always looking for the good thing, but you got credit for it. So we'll move on from that. We can talk more about that in a minute. I do want to talk about Greer Jones, because I'm going to tell you when I realized you had a great reverence for Greer. Greer was from Wichita, Kansas, sort of grew up in the same part of the world as you and me, kind of. I grew up in between the two of you. You were in Ardmore. He was in Wichita. I was in Ponca City. But he was a tough guy and a great player. And one day, Greer was going to bring his team down to Oklahoma to play someplace. And he called me up and asked me, hey, could I bring the team to Karsten Creek? And so I came into your office. I said, would that be okay? What'd you say? Do you remember?
No, I don't remember.
Well, you said something like, well, Greer Jones is the greatest player in the history of this program. We're never going to charge. It was like, we're not doing anything against that guy. And I thought, wow, normally it's pretty locked gate around here. And, but then when stories started coming out that you would talk about Greer, and it was always, this guy must have been amazing. Well, he was a hero of mine as a boy as well, because he was an Oklahoma State golfer. So what drew you to Greer, and why he was so good in your eyes?
Well, he was by far the best player on our team, and he's the one guy that could beat Coach Harris. And then he won the national championship in '68, the one year I got to play on the team with him. I don't think I ever saw him shoot over par out at Lakeside. It didn't matter if it was wind blowing 50 miles an hour. He could play in the wind like no one else. He knew how to flight the ball. It's like it didn't even bother his golf ball. And back then, that was a real unusual skill. Today, everybody can flight the ball with the new balls they have and the metalwoods and all that stuff. But back then, it was really unique that he could do that. Great putter, great competitor. I can't say enough good things about Greer Jones. So, and then our friendship paid dividends for me, because after he was out on the PGA Tour, he sent Bob Tway to us. I took him sight unseen on Greer's recommendation, and then he sent Craig Hainline to us, and he said, "Don't look at his golf swing, because that's not going to impress you. But trust me, he takes everybody's money at McDonald Park in the money games every weekend," and he was right about him. Made first team All-American as a freshman. Then he sent me Chris Young, our current women's tennis coach. And then he's also responsible for our softball coach, women's softball coach, Kenny Gajewski. So he's made 4 recommendations to me in the, 40-something years since we were together on the golf team, and every one of them has been a grand slam home run. So I can't say enough good things for Greer Jones. You just need more friends like him. You don't even have to go out on the road recruit.
Yeah, that Greer was, what you said about his ball striking, it would be really interesting to see the modern day players take a persimmon club with a balata ball and on a 40-mile-an-hour day and go see what golf looked like. It's pretty hard back in those days.
Well, I think we should be like the major leagues, and you should go and go back, and you should only be able to play with the wood. And let's see what DeChambeau could do with the wood. I know he's going to hit it a long way, but he's not going to hit it nearly as far as he is with that metalwood. And we've got to do something to get golf closer to the way it was when I played it back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s than what we see out there today. I don't even recognize the game that's played today by everyone, not just a few players, by everyone. Everybody hits it a long way that has any kind of skill at all. And you continue to have to make these golf courses longer. And if they had done that in the Major League Baseball, if they had allowed technology to do with the equipment like what we've done in golf, you wouldn't be able to play in any of those classic Major League parks. You'd be building them new ones all the time. And so someone's got to get control of this. I don't have the answers, but it just seems so simplistic to look at Major League Baseball, take a page from their manual and try to do the same thing in golf. Maybe it won't work, but you got to try something, because where we're headed is not a good direction right now.
You know, you said maybe it won't work. That's another thing I always appreciated about your coaching was you tried some things that looked way out of bounds to a lot of people. And you just wanted to see if something better was out there, and you were always looking for that.
Yeah, if everyone was doing one thing, I just try to do the opposite.
I noticed that.
If you want to be better than everybody, you can't do what they do.
You remember telling me, I said something about blah, blah, blah. And I said, you said, yeah. And I said, well, that's kind of unrealistic, isn't it? And what do you think? Do you remember the statement you made to me?
Being great has nothing to do with being realistic.
Never forget that. I'd been working for you for just a couple of months, and you said, if you want to do something really special, forget about being realistic. You can't be that great by being realistic.
Well, and you know this, you've heard me say it. What you dream about, what you think about, what you talk about, what you work hard for will happen 100%. And the only limitation in life is how big you can dream. You know, how big are your thoughts? We place all the limits on ourselves. And we live in the greatest country in the world. You can do anything you want to do. You can be anything you want to be. And the older I get, the more I believe in that. I just wish that I had known some of this stuff back when I was 18 to 20 years old. You know, youth is wasted on the young. I saw a quote, I think it was from Sigmund Freud, it's been 3 or 4 years ago. And it's, the more you think about this quote, the more profound it becomes. But it goes like this: if youth knew, if age could. Now that's what coaching is all about. That's what life's all about. That's what higher education is all about, right there.
Wow, that's every coach ought to hear that comment, ought to write it down, put it on their bulletin board. So that's profound, Mike. Thanks. You know, you didn't start out to be a coach. I know you wanted to play the game for a living, and so you finished at Oklahoma State in 1970. You were a Big 8 conference champion. You were going to get your master's, and so that took a couple of years. And you played a little professional golf during that time. But Laban Harris was 65 years old, and they were going to host the national championship at Stillwater Country Club. Can you run me through sort of the lead up to that, about that championship, which I attended as a 13-year-old boy? I'll never forget it. It was amazing. And then kind of the way you became the coach. Kind of take us through that little stretch of a year or two.
Well, make a long story short, I got the job as coach because no one else could afford to take it. All the other candidates that they had were older than me, had established families, and I was fresh out of college and had a young family. And what they were willing to pay, I was probably the only one that could afford to take it. $6,500, even back in 1973, that wasn't a lot of money. And so I was going to take over after Coach Harris retired, and he got the NCAA championship at Stillwater Country Club that year. And back then, Stillwater Country Club was a really good golf course, very difficult, very challenging. It was a fitting venue for the national championship. And, he did a lot of promoting for that. He raised a lot of money to run a first class championship. And I've never seen that many people at a tournament, at any college tournament before or since. Looked like a tour event. And I said for years, and I wish I had more pictures of what the galleries look like, but there were more people at that championship than the next 20 years added together. Very, very significant. And at the time, I really didn't appreciate how significant it was. I still revere that now, looking in the rearview mirror. And but that was a testimony to the respect everybody had for Coach Harris, and they wanted to send him out in style. So people showed up out of respect for him, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So,
yeah, that was an amazing tournament, and it's a fact that's the last time the NCAA champion was over par. Ben Crenshaw won over par. It's the last time it happened. So,
I don't even bother to go Google that up. If you say it, I know it's true.
Trust me, it's right. Now, the closest to that was Alejandro Caniceres at Karsten Creek in 03 was 1 under. So that's the closest it's been to over par since then. So Stillwater, go ahead.
I can't believe that guy got under par.
It was, I could tell some stories, Mike, but I won't do it on this podcast.
Reed Hatley,
Reed Hatley, that poor guy. He's playing amateur golf again, but boy, you threatened to end him right there.
Yeah, Ryan Himmel, who's up there at Norman now. We remember him. He didn't exactly rip that place up.
And he didn't make a lot of birdies that week, as I recall. It
Serves
was a
him
tough
right
golf.
for not being a cowboy.
The craziest thing about that championship, and we're not talking about that right now, but we had all those years leading up to it, and we figured, gosh, it's going to play hard with all this rough. And when the wind blows, well, the wind didn't blow that week. It was dead calm for 4 days.
The best laid plans of mice and men.
You didn't get exactly what you wanted, but anyway. So, Mike, I want to transition. You became a coach, as you said, for almost no money. Your wife, Robbie, had to work in the bookstore. You were teaching a golf class or doing something at Lakeside. You had to struggle to make ends meet there early on. But it wasn't long before you decided, you thought maybe I could do this for a living. And so we could go through the ins and outs of all of your record, and it's kind of amazing how many tournaments you won, how many national championships, all that. We won't go into that yet. But I want to talk about several areas where I think you've had a major impact in college golf. So a lot of people wouldn't know about it because it did happen a while back. But so I'm going to talk about certain areas, and you feel free to say as much or as little as you want about each of these areas. But one of them would be what you were forced to do early on, and that's fundraising. So you inherited a very meager budget. I think maybe under $30,000 for your entire budget, including your salary, your first year. Talk about how you made fundraising a focus early on.
Well, I had no choice. $27,000 was the budget, and that included recruiting, team travel, everything. So even back in those days, as Spartan as college golf was, you needed more resources than that, especially in an out-of-the-way place like Stillwater with the weather disadvantages, if you wanted to win the national championship. And so what I viewed at the time as a huge, huge negative, and I felt disadvantaged relative to the blue bloods like Texas University, for example, whose golf coach got whatever resources he needed to put a team on the golf course, and we basically had nothing in Stillwater. What I thought was a huge negative or disadvantage at the time turned out to be one of the great blessings in my whole life. And it forced me to do something that I was uncomfortable doing and had no idea how to do, which was raise money. And it turned out to be one of the great lessons I learned my whole life. And so many things like that everyone faces in their life. And, unfortunately, a lot of people come up on a hurdle or a hill or an obstacle, and they either turn around and leave or try to go around instead of figuring out how to go over. And those obstacles, those problems are just opportunities. And that's one thing that I really give you a lot of credit for. You tend to look at the positive rather than the negative your whole life. Uh, probably only been one moment in time that wasn't the case. And you know what year that was?
Certainly. I remember very well.
Yeah. And, it just shows what you can do to yourself when your priorities get skewed out of order. Can happen to all of us. We're just human beings. And you had taken yourself from a great golf coach to something less than you should be, could be, and ended up being miserable. I don't think that's overstating it.
No, I wasn't in a good spot. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Yep.
all self-imposed. And it just goes to show that when your priorities get out of order, what can happen to you? And all you needed was a wake-up call. And I would say that moment in time when that happened, probably the most unpleasant, disappointing, biggest failure in some ways in your whole life, turned out to be the greatest opportunity, a rebirth, a rekindling, and set you up for where you are now. And what I think is going to be, when you reflect on it 20 or 25 years from now, ending up in Waco, Texas is probably the greatest thing that ever happened to you. And I know for a fact that it's going to be one of the greatest things that ever happened to Baylor University. And it's going to be a huge blessing for every single student athlete smart enough to sign up to play golf at Baylor University, because they're going to get what I got from Laban Harris.
I appreciate you saying that, Mike. You didn't have to say that, but I do
Well,
appreciate it.
I can't pay a higher compliment than to compare you with Laban Harris, but I
Uh,
believe that.
I feel the same way about that. That's an amazing compliment. My brother Tim took golf lessons from Laban Harris, so I remember very well his impact.
Well,
And
the one thing you have going for you is you don't talk about it, you do it. And so if those guys on the team will know what it takes to be great, just show up and you'll be a living, breathing example of what it takes.
well, don't you think that's what a coach should be? I mean, that's when you come right down to it. They can all look different in the way they do it, but you know it when you see it. Correct?
Well, yeah, you're just a professor. You're you're teaching life skills. You're changing lives on a daily basis. So uh, you're one of the most effective professors on the whole campus to begin with, and then you get your kids for an unlimited number of hours every week, don't you? I know there's a 20-hour rule, but voluntarily they can come spend all the time they want to with you. No organized practice. Well, you add up 4 years of that or 5 years of that, and you think about the impact you're going to have on those youngsters. It's priceless. So, yeah, they come there to learn about golf and to improve their golf and play on a winning team and be part of a team and all that stuff. But what it really gets down to is they're getting an education and a an intensive course in leadership and what it takes to be successful and happy in life. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters, isn't it?
It is what
And,
matters, and it
and if
goes
you
back to your.
concentrate on that, oh, by the way, you'll win a whole lot of golf tournaments in the process. And those kids will shoot a whole lot of low rounds. And you'll have a big old trophy case full of examples of what happens when you do it right.
I agree with you. That points back to your original point about your dad and mom saying, you go where you think you're going to be the best you can be. You go where you want to go. We've saved up for you. If more kids were able to make that decision, then they'd probably end up in spots where they'd be learning a lot of life lessons and doing all that. But you switched this on me, Mike. You got me talking about me. Let's talk about you again. Okay.
I like talking about you. You're a
I know
lot
you do.
more fascinating.
Okay. But I do want to tell one story here, though. I want to talk about the 1973 Cowboy Pro-Am because if nothing else, if we don't even talk about you in this, we're going to talk about some men that, with a very small seed that was planted, created something that was very, very big after that. So to me, it's one of the great stories in the history of college golf. And that is Jerry Walsh introducing Sherman Smith and T. Boone Pickens to you that year.
Yeah, tiny oaks are uh, what is it? Tall oaks from tiny acorns grow, something like that. Yeah, we started that pro-am in 1973, and I'd met Jerry Walsh because he took lessons from Laban Harris, and he came by to see me that that fall, and he said, "Hey, is there anything I can do for you? I know that you're new on the job and you're a young guy. You're probably going to need some help." And Jerry was in the mud business and in the oil business. Mud, you got to have drilling mud to drill an oil well. And I said, "Yeah, Mr. Walsh, if you'd come play in our pro-am this fall, it'd be appreciated." He said, "Well, yeah, I'll come play in the pro-am." And he brought two of his friends with him, a guy named Boone Pickens and Sherman Smith. And so that was 1973 until 1995 when Jerry Walsh was killed in a car accident on I-40 close to Amarillo. Those three guys never missed the pro-am. And you're talking about Jerry Walsh, Sherman Smith, and Boone Pickens, three best friends, all in the oil business. Sherman had a drilling company, Boone had the oil company, and Jerry Walsh sold all the drilling mud to both of them. And so they came every year, and they saw that what they did in the pro-am, the money they gave made a difference for us. So they continually gave more, and we did more, accomplished more. Uh, and then that friendship resulted in everything that's happened at our university in the last 20 years as far as the transformation, uh, I'd say mentally and physically on our campus about what's possible at Oklahoma State University. Because Boone Pickens single-handedly picked us up by the bootstraps, and made us into something that we never believed that we could be. And it all started back at that pro-am with probably a $250 donation. And before it was all said and done, Boone Pickens gave away $1 billion and probably gave half of that to Oklahoma State University, inspired Sherman Smith to give over 20 million, and then countless other people to give multi-millions. So yeah, you don't ever discount how significant any moment in time could be. Don't ever marginalize anyone. Everybody's important. Everybody matters. And one of the things of the many things that set Boone Pickens apart is he treated everybody like a king. He treated everyone equally, black, white, yellow, custodian, janitor, king, queen, president, didn't matter. He treated everyone with respect. He had time for everybody. He set an example of how you should treat your fellow humans. And he always told me there's two kinds of people in the world, givers and takers. Be a giver. All things are possible if you're a giver. Surround yourself with givers. And the takers think that they're always going to get ahead. They're going to take the shortcut. They're going to end up with all the money. Well, they may end up with the money, but they're going to be miserable and unhappy at the end of the day. So be a giver. So yeah, tall oaks from tiny acorns grow, and treat everybody with respect. Be nice to everybody. Doesn't cost anything, and you can't go anywhere in this life that matters of significance by yourself. You've got to have help, and the more help, the better. So make as many friends as you possibly can, because they're going to come in handy every single day of your life.
Yeah, that's an amazing story because just the small little pro-am I think you raised about $7,000 that year.
You
So not a
know,
lot of money.
it was a lot of money.
Yeah, it was then, it was, but it's amazing what it's grown into, and the fact that so many people, well, and then you were doing something too. You were putting some production behind that. You guys were winning championships and doing a lot of things that made more people want to get involved. But the one thing that came out of that initial fundraising surge that I'm not sure will happen again is the way Karsten Creek came about, and the fact that it was built without financing anything, and the fact you had money in the bank when you opened. Can you give a brief kind of story about how Karsten Creek kind of came about?
Well, the Coach Harris built Lakeside with volunteer labor, and the first month I was on the job as golf coach, I shared an office with a OSU golfer that was in landscape architecture, Tom Dusen, and he did a scale model of a golf course with the trees and all the relief and everything uh, out west of Stillwater. And I said, that property's in Stillwater? Yeah, it's out there by Highway 51. I said, I didn't realize there were that many hills and trees anywhere in Stillwater. So the next time I drove out Highway 51 headed to Interstate 35, I did look off to the north, and there it was. And I decided to build a golf course then. So that's 1973. It took until 1994 to get it actually built. And along the way, I learned some lessons. I learned that I didn't want to take anything from the university because it always comes with strings attached. So I set about buying the land from the university, paid fair market value, raised all the money to build the golf course. I knew I wanted to build it debt free. And then I wanted to have an endowment because you couldn't justify a championship golf course in Stillwater. Community won't support it, too expensive. And when I retired as the golf coach, we owned the golf course free and clear, and we had $31 million in the bank. So another example of start small. The best advantage I had growing up as a golf coach was no money. It forced me to do things I was uncomfortable doing, and it ended up where we had an unlimited budget, had more money than we knew what to do with. Uh, and at the end of the day, there were no excuses for not being successful. You had to look in the mirror to find the person responsible, because there's no reason you can't win at a high level at Oklahoma State University.
The the part that's lost on that story for a lot of people is 1973 to 1994. That's 21 years from the moment you conceived the idea until you actually, May 5th, 1994, hit the first golf shot. To me, perseverance is one of the most underrated qualities. And you kind of briefly touched on it earlier, but you had that quality, and it took a long time, and you were winning championships and doing all that, but you had to persevere to get to that finish line.
Yeah, just patience. But you're going to do the same thing. Just plant that seed in your mind. Put that dream in there. Put that idea in there. You look at. I haven't been to your complex, but I think you're probably in your office at your golf facility.
I am.
You raised all the money for that.
I had a lot of good people helping me, but yes, sir, I did. It was a project that I knew had to happen.
All right. So here's what's going to happen. Whoever gave the money, the return they expected on that investment was that it was going to change the lives of the young people, and it was going to make Baylor golf better than it had been. Well, it's happened. They got a better return than they anticipated already. So what's that going to mean? They're going to give more, and they're going to talk to their friends. And so fundraising is going to get easier for you. So now the question becomes, how much money do you want to raise? What do you want to build, and what do you want to do with the money?
Well, we've got big dreams. So I've watched it in person. Big dreams.
It's kind of scary because you're sitting in the middle of all the best players in the United States of America. They grow up in the state of Texas.
Did you notice that, Mike?
Yeah, I figured out early in my career, if you get the best player in Texas every year, best golfer, you're going to be hard to beat.
Well, I do
If
know
you're
this.
sitting in the middle of all of them, you've got, what do they say in real estate? Location, location,
Location,
location.
location. I will say this, and this is, I'm going to put this out as a fact that people may argue, but the fact that you got Lindy Miller from Fort Worth and Skyver Plank from Dallas to come to Stillwater, Oklahoma, when they were the best players in the country, is top. That's the best two jobs of recruiting in the history of college golf.
Pretty
Boom.
good. It's
Huh?
pretty good. Yeah.
Wouldn't you
Yeah, good
say?
players make you look really smart. I figured that one
I'm
out.
just saying, Mike, to get those guys to come north, that was
Yeah.
crazy
Well,
good.
you know, it doesn't. I figured out that Coach Harris made his players. I probably wasn't as good a teacher as him. So, uh, my strategy was recruit the best players in the world and then get out of the way, and good things are probably going to happen.
Pretty
So,
smart. Pretty
yeah,
smart.
yeah, I
And
had
by
a
the
lot
way,
of players made me look good.
I've got Alan Bratton's picture at all entrances to Waco because the only other time an OSU golfer came to Waco, Texas, they got Dave Eichelberger. He won a national championship at OSU and he won 10 times on the PGA Tour. No OSU golfers coming to Waco, Texas, just in case.
Yeah, don't be so sure now, Coach.
All right. Well, Laburn did get Dave Eichelberger out of Waco, Texas. So there you
We
go.
might catch you napping some afternoon and slip in there.
I don't know what a nap is, Mike. You know that.
Has Johnny Fields got your picture posted out there on the city limits of Austin?
John Fields loves me. You know that. He does. We're good
Yeah,
buddies.
I'll say this: if he loves you, it's a love-hate relationship.
Okay, well, that may be true, but I do have a lot of respect for John. He's done a great job. So, okay, I tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to say part two coming another time. Well,
All right.
just to hit on the player development part of it, which we didn't get to. But thank you so much, Mike, for coming on today. You've been a great guest. It's been fantastic.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hey, like I said, Mike Holder is the busiest man on the planet, so he had to run to a meeting, and we kind of had to stop short a little bit today of covering all the subjects he and I wanted to talk about. But he's agreed to come back another time for part two, so I would stay tuned for that probably sometime this late fall or winter. Love to have Mike on here again, just talk about some other things, one of them being player development, which is probably one of his specialties through the years. I think that'll be a great teaser for part two. But I'm really thankful for his time today as he came on to the podcast and shared a lot of wisdom today, very much so. Now, I had a front row seat to this for about 16 years, so I got to hear this a lot. But the listeners, you haven't heard it that often. So I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and thank you, Mike Holder.